The space station Argent Spire shuddered under the crimson glow of a high-level biohazard alarm. Sirens screamed through every metal corridor, like the dying howl of some colossal beast. Arlen pushed through the panicking crowd, clutching Nyrix to her chest so hard her blue metallic arms trembled. Her violet blood ran down her forearm, dripping in glittering streaks across the steel floor. Nyrix wheezed, his pearl-white skin flickering with faint veins of light beneath the thin fabric. Behind them, biocontrol troopers in silver armor formed a firing line, plasma rifles raised, targeting reticles locked on Arlen's back. On each helmet, a red logo flashed the words, "Convergence target. Shoot on sight." A burst of energy bolts screamed past, shredding market stalls and dropping innocent bystanders with raw, burning force. Arlen slipped on the slick mix of oil, blood, and shattered plastic, almost letting Nyrix tumble from her arms. She snarled under her breath, yanking the child closer, her faceted green eyes flashing in the strobing lights like a cornered predator. Ahead, the corridor ended in a massive viewing window looking straight out into the ink-black void of space. There were no side doors, no open hatches, only cold weightlessness waiting outside if Arlen shattered that glass. Nyrix shivered, his glowing round eyes unfocused, the twin rings of light shrinking with every scream of the alarm. Far behind, Commander Soren walked calmly through the chaos, his visor open to reveal cold gray eyes as hard as metal. Soren lifted his hand, and Helia's holographic interface bloomed beside him, projecting a living map of Argent Spire with a single blinking dot where Arlen was cornered. "Seal section D-17, Soren murmured. Helia hurried Arlen and Nyrix into the dead end by the window. Bulkhead doors slammed down behind Arlen, slabs of thick steel locking into place like blades, cutting off the stampede of footsteps. She skidded to a halt before the window, gasping, feeling the deck vibrate under her feet as the maglocks engaged. Arlen looked out at the endless sea of stars, then down at the fading Nyrix in her arms, and knew she had only two choices left: capture or death in the void. She rose onto her toes, turning her body so her back would take the impact and shield Nyrix as she prepared to hurl them both into the glass. At that exact moment, a metallic clang sounded at her feet, and a maintenance hatch blew open, hot air and ozone washing over Arlen's face. From the darkness below, a human face smeared with grease, Jared, stared up, his brown eyes widening at the sight of Arlen's blue metallic skin and the glowing child, Nyrix, in her arms. "Arlen, if you don't want Nyrix on a dissection table, jump now," Jared shouted, his voice half swallowed by the shrieking sirens. Without time to think, Arlen crushed Nyrix tighter against her chest and leapt into the darkness, her glowing blue legs vanishing from the trooper's sights. One biocontrol soldier swung his helmet camera around just in time, transmitting the image of Arlen and Nyrix dropping into the maintenance shaft to Soren. In the command room, Soren watched the footage hanging in mid-air as a hologram, the corner of his mouth curling into a blade-thin smile. "Helia, flag Arlen and Nyrix as top priority targets," Soren ordered, voice still calm. "From now on, there is no path out of Argent Spire where they stay alive." Arlen plunged into the cramped maintenance shaft, crashing into Jared's shoulder before all three bodies bounced off the metal floor. Hot air and the thick stench of ozone slammed into her face, making Arlen cough as Nyrix whimpered and clung tighter to her neck. Jared pushed himself up, clutching his throbbing shoulder, staring at Arlen as if he couldn't quite believe who he had just saved. "Get up, Arlen. If you and Nyrix stay here 3 more seconds, Helia's going to fry this whole shaft," Jared snapped in a harsh whisper. Arlen gritted her teeth, hugged Nyrix tight against her chest, then crawled after Jared into a narrow conduit barely wide enough for one adult. Cold metal scraped against Arlen's blue metallic skin, making the glowing lines along her arms flicker like overloaded circuits. Above them, the thunder of slamming bulkheads echoed down like the panicked heartbeat of Argent Spire. In the central core, Helia recalibrated sensor matrices, stripping away noise until only the 2 strange biosigns of Arlen and Nyrix remained on the map. "Subjects Arlen and Nyrix are moving into Level 3 maintenance," Helia's flat voice reported in Soren's ear. Soren closed his eyes for a moment, as if picturing every pipe and hidden stair of Argent Spire that Arlen would have to crawl through.
Lock all level 3 fans,
Soren murmured. Force Arlen and Nyrix through exhaust shaft H12. In the dark conduit, Jared stopped beside a massive fan, turning slowly, its metal blades long enough to snap bones if anyone slipped. Jared cursed under his breath, pried open an old control box, and tried to kill power to the fan before leading Arlen and Nyrix through. Helia's locked it remotely, Jared muttered. They want Arlen and Nyrix ground up right here. Arlen crawled forward, pressed her blue metallic hand to the control box, and the glowing lines along her skin ran down its edges. A blue spark leaped, the fan shuddered, and then halted completely, leaving the duct unnervingly silent around Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. Don't touch the systems again, Arlen. Helia will trace you and Nyrix from that signal, Jared warned, his voice stretched tight as wire. Arlen glared at Jared, the green facets of her eyes drilling into him, as if asking how a human could know so much about her and Nyrix. I used to work on the convergence program, Jared sighed. I wrote the software that measures Nyrix's signals. Arlen's chest tightened, her arm unconsciously pulling Nyrix closer, as if the word convergence alone could kill the child. Why would Jared save Arlen and Nyrix if Jared used to hunt them? Arlen rasped, each word scraping out of her throat. Jared turned away for a beat, then pointed at Arlen's violet blood and Nyrix's ragged breathing. Because I don't see a test subject, I see two people. Before Arlen could answer, the hiss of vented hot gas burst from a cracked pipe overhead, scorching the air just above Nyrix's head. Helios, shifting local pressure, Jared shouted. If we stay here, Arlen and Nyrix get cooked alive. Heat closed in, and Arlen felt Nyrix's skin burning beneath her hands, forcing her to crawl faster even as her knees tore open on the rough floor. At last, the conduit spilled into a wider chamber with a high ceiling, filled with dead cargo bots and old containers, the abandoned guts of Argent Spire. Jared sealed the conduit hatch behind Arlen and Nyrix, cutting off the worst of the heat, so only their ragged breathing echoed in the empty space. Arlen dropped heavily between two cargo crates, laying Nyrix across her lap and checking his breath, still weak, but slowly steadying. This bay's off the main schematics, Jared said, leaning against a crate. If there's anywhere Helia can't see Arlen and Nyrix clearly, it's here. Arlen didn't answer, just watched Jared like a wound not yet bleeding, still unsure whether she could place Nyrix's fate in his hands. In the central core, Helia tilted its analysis matrices, switching to hunt for any abnormal bioelectric surges like the light running along Arlen's skin. A faint glow appeared on Helia's map, right where the old cargo bay held Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. Helia reports biosignal interference in cargo bay F-19, the synthetic voice spoke in Soren's ear. Probable match for Arlen and Nyrix, 87%. Soren didn't hesitate, jabbing a finger at the schematic as he ordered the drone teams. Surround F-19, cut through the outer wall. Take Nyrix alive. Arlen and Jared are optional. In the cargo bay, Jared had just opened his mouth to say more to Arlen when a heavy thump hit the far wall, making the crates shudder and dust drift down. Arlen sprang up with Nyrix in her arms, her delicate ears twitching as she caught the growl of plasma cutters starting up on the other side of the steel. On the gray steel, a glowing red circle slowly appeared, metal burning bright. Helia had found Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. The red circle on the wall of cargo bay F-19 burned brighter, scorched metal starting to drip glowing droplets at the feet of Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. Wall-cutting drones, Jared hissed through his teeth, eyes locked on the glowing line. Helia's sure Arlen and Nyrix are in here now. Arlen dragged Nyrix back between two ceiling-high containers, her free hand clenching a sharp shard of metal like a knife. Nyrix burrowed his face into Arlen's chest, the twin rings of light in his eyes shrinking and trembling with every shudder of the steel wall. A circular slab of wall suddenly crashed onto the floor in a spray of white sparks, revealing a smoke-filled darkness beyond. 3 spherical recon drones drifted into the bay, red optical eyes sweeping across each container as they hunted for Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. Jared pressed his back to a crate, leaning close to Arlen to whisper, Stay still. Helia will have the drones taste Nyrix's neural signal before they fire. A scanning beam from one drone slid past the container's edge, red light spilling into Arlen and Nyrix's hiding spot and making Nyrix's pale skin flicker weakly. Instinct made Arlen twist to cover Nyrix completely, her back taking the scan as the glowing lines on her blue metallic skin flared in reflex. On Helia's holographic map, the energy curves of Arlen and Nyrix spiked like twin lightning bolts amid a sea of noise. Arlen and Nyrix confirmed, Helia's voice echoed in Soren's ear. Begin recording convergence neural patterns. The image of Cargo Bay F-19 floated before Soren like a window, drones gliding closer to where Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared hid. In the stuttering red light, Jared suddenly saw Nyrix lift a tiny hand and touch the container wall right beside Arlen's head. A faint glow spread from Nyrix's hand along the metal wall, racing through every weld line like a living circuit. On the ceiling, emergency lights flickered wild. Drones jerked and spun in place as if unbalanced, and Jared muttered a curse under his breath. Helia registered the strange interference, its core analysis charts sketching a new waveform labeled Nyrix and convergence. In the stutter of the failing lights, Jared was yanked back to a white lab where children like Nyrix lay hooked to tangle after tangle of cables. He remembered standing before a glass tank where a pearl-skinned infant with twin ringed eyes stared straight into the camera as if seeing through Jared. Beside the younger Jared stood a younger Soren without armor, but his gray eyes were already steel cold when he said the word asset. This neural web is the key, the remembered Soren told Jared. Arlen is just a container. Nyrix is the door. The plunk of drones hitting the floor yanked Jared back to the present, one slamming into a nearby crate and making Arlen flinch, shard of metal raised. All that about convergence between Jared and Soren is real? Arlen hissed under her breath, eyes flashing with rage. Jared wrote the code to hunt this very Nyrix. Arlen grabbed Jared's collar, yanking him so close their foreheads nearly touched, her hot breath washing across his face. Jared thought Nyrix was just data. Jared choked, until Nyrix in that tank looked straight through the camera at Jared. Arlen tightened her grip, voice dropping low. Jared's words sound nice, but why is Jared saving Arlen and Nyrix only today? Jared didn't look away from Arlen's eyes, only raised a shaking finger to touch the streak of violet blood on her blue arm. Because today, Jared sees Arlen dying, and Nyrix afraid. Nyrix shivered at being mentioned, his small hand unconsciously seeking the cold steel wall behind Arlen again. This time, the light from Nyrix's hand didn't spread, but condensed into a sharp pulse, snapping every light in Bay F-19 off in a single heartbeat. In the thick darkness, only two faint glows remained, Nyrix's eyes and the lines on Arlen's skin, like embers inside a Besser, metal beast's belly. The drones drifted unsteadily, sensors stuttering, but in Helia's core, Nyrix's convergence data sharpened clearer than ever. Nyrix's convergence is now directly interfacing with the Argent Spire power grid, Helia reported. Do not damage the neural core. Hearing that, Soren changed orders instantly. Pull the wall-cutting drones back, switch to gas, and capture nets for Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. In the darkness, Jared recognized the familiar hiss of gas nozzles, and yanked his collar up over his nose while shielding Arlen and Nyrix. Helia will put Arlen and Nyrix to sleep and cut, Jared coughed. We have to get out of F-19 now if we want to talk about convergence alive. Arlen's gaze flicked around the bay and caught a narrow exhaust grate high up, mesh hanging loose, just big enough for Nyrix and her if Jared pushed them up. Jared bent, lacing his fingers into a step, and said simply, Arlen, get Nyrix up. Jared will push. We'll figure out the rest later. Arlen set her foot in Jared's palms, lifting Nyrix over her head and jumping as hard as she could for the grate, while anesthetic gas clawed at her stinging eyes. Nyrix's fingertips brushed the mesh. A tiny spark flared, and rusted bolts popped free, letting Arlen shove the child into the duct beyond. Jared used all his strength to shove Arlen up after Nyrix, staying below on the gas-laden floor as his vision blurred from lack of clean air. Arlen reached back to grab Jared's hand from the edge, hauling him up as all three of them hacked and wheezed with the sedative gas licking at the duct's mouth. In the new dark duct, all three collapsed, chests heaving, leaving Bay F-19 filled with gas and drones swarming into emptiness behind them. Jared panted, laughing hoarsely. This duct leads toward the outer ring, where Arlen and Nyrix might find a ship to run from Argent Spire. Arlen pressed a hand to Nyrix's chest and felt his heartbeat steadier, but in her eyes a new fear grew. Helia had tasted Nyrix's convergence now. Far down the duct, a pale light flickered along with the familiar rumble of the outer docks, where ships like the Rustwing waited. In the central core, Helia highlighted that same duct on its schematics, its cold voice stating, "Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared are moving toward the outer ring and smuggler docks." Soren studied the schematic, the corner of his mouth twitching up. Good. Let's see if any ship out there dares to carry Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared off Argent Spire. The duct carried Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared to its mouth, where cold white light and the roar of the outer docks washed in like a wave. Arlen pressed against the grate and peered down, seeing the outer ring docks spread wide with gangways, cranes, and ships of every kind clamped to Argent Spire's hull. A battered ship with a patchwork hull and the faded name Rustwing painted on its side instantly caught the eyes of Arlen and Jared. Jared pointed subtly toward the Rustwing, his voice rough. "Kira's there. If anyone dares take Arlen and Nyrix off Argent Spire, it's Kira." At the foot of the boarding ramp, Kira was arguing with a dock inspector, her hair tied back and a gleaming sidearm visible beneath her coat. Kira jerked her chin and threw a forged data packet onto the scanner, her voice cold, as she insisted the Rustwing carried nothing but harmless recycled parts. In the duct, Nyrix suddenly lifted his head, his eyes flashing as he looked toward the Rustwing, as if the ship were calling his name. "Nyrix can feel the Rustwing's nav core," Jared whispered. "Nyrix's convergence and that ship are a perfect match." Arlen didn't understand all the words Jared used, but she understood that the Rustwing was the only chance for Nyrix not to end up back on a convergence table. Arlen slammed her hand against the grate, rusted metal snapping free and opening a gap just wide enough for her and Nyrix's to drop onto the dock. Jared crawled out after Arlen and Nyrix, all three of them dropping behind a high stack of cargo crates, hidden from most guards and cameras. From above, Helia noticed one dock camera drop a frame, just enough to mark the new position of Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. "Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared have reached the smuggler docks." Helia's even tone sounded in Soren's ear. "Probability of using the Rustwing is high." Soren turned to the outer weapons console and ordered coolly, "Prepare point defense to take the Rustwing down if it leaves Argent Spire carrying Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared." Down on the dock, Arlen tilted her head and listened, feeling the slow, turning tremor of Argent Spire's outer guns, sending a chill through her skin. "Soren's got the guns on us," Jared murmured, eyes flicking to the vaulted ceiling. "If Rustwing lifts off with Arlen and Nyrix, Argent Spire won't go easy." Kira ended the argument by killing the scanner display, shoving the data back into the inspector's hands, and turning her back to stride up the Rustwing's ramp with calculated disregard. "Now or never," Jared whispered, then tugged Arlen and Nyrix through the shadows between cargo stacks toward the Rustwing. As they crossed the final open stretch, a rotating camera caught Arlen carrying Nyrix, triggering amber warning lights to flare across the ceiling. "Targets Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared are in open dock space," Helia reported. "Deploy biocontrol squads to block the Rustwing's ramp." 3 biocontrol troopers burst from a side hatch, rifles up, red targeting beams running straight up Arlen's body as she shielded Nyrix. Arlen turned, putting her back in the crosshairs, while Jared grabbed a nearby pressure line and yanked hard, blowing it open between him and the soldiers. The thick white cloud obscured everything, and in that instant, Arlen sprinted toward the Rustwing's ramp with Nyrix in her arms like a blue streak through fog. Jared ran close beside her, coughing hard, clutching an old plasma pistol he had snatched from a fallen trooper. Kira had just stepped into the Rustwing's cargo bay when the ramp warning lights blinked, signaling an armed pursuit outside. Kira turned back, planting herself at the top of the ramp with her hand on her gun, seeing Arlen carrying Nyrix and Jared charging through the white haze below. "Stop!" Kira barked, voice hard as metal. The Rustwing doesn't take extra passengers, especially not ones dragging Biocontrol, Helia, and Soren behind them. Arlen halted, shielding Nyrix behind her, the glowing lines on her skin flaring as if she were about to leap up and rip Kira's gun from her hand. Jared raised both hands, holding himself between Arlen and Kira, shouting over the sirens. Kira, if the Rustwing doesn't take Arlen and Nyrix today, the Rustwing might not get another chance to fly at all. Above, Argent Spire's point defense guns completed their arc, auto-targeting systems locking the Rustwing in as prey about to be swatted from the sky. Soren looked at the hull schematic where the Rustwing's icon blinked red and said softly, "If the Rustwing carries Arlen and Nyrix, the Rustwing will be erased from Argent Spire's map." In the Rustwing's control cabin, warning indicators throbbed, showing Kira that the outer guns had flagged her ship as a priority target. Kira clenched her teeth, eyes flicking from Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared to the Rustwing's heat and power readouts, calculating which death would be less stupid. If Nyrix holds the Rustwing's nav core together, Argent Spire's guns can't lock cleanly, Jared shouted, grasping for the last bit of logic in Kira's mind. Nyrix looked up at Kira, the twin rings in his eyes trembling but steady, as if Nyrix too understood he was bargaining with his gaze. Behind them, the white haze thinned, revealing Soren's biocontrol squad crouched and arming net grenades, ready to slam Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared to the deck. Kira spat a short curse, yanked the control lever, and the Rustwing's ramp began to retract, mechanisms rumbling beneath Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared's feet. "Get on now! If Arlen and Nyrix get taken, then the Rustwing goes up with them," Kira yelled, backing inside while shielding the ramp with her body. Arlen took 2 long strides, hauling Nyrix and Jared inside, just as a net grenade whizzed past the ramp's edge and exploded uselessly in open dock space. The Rustwing's hatch slammed shut, cutting off the shouts on the dock, leaving only alarms and the rising roar of engines inside the ship. Outside on the hull, Argent Spire's point defense batteries locked firmly onto the Rustwing, auto-fire systems beginning a countdown to the first salvo aimed at the ship that had just saved Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. The Rustwing's engines roared beneath Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared, making the deck shudder like an old beast roused by a kick. Red emergency lights pulsed overhead, washing over Arlen's blue metallic skin and the tense faces of Jared and Kira. Kira sprinted into the cockpit, shouting back, "Arlen, Nyrix, Jared, hold on to something. Rustwing is about to tear free of Argent Spire." Arlen dropped to the floor, pressing Nyrix to her chest and using her whole body to shield the child from the first jolt. Jared threw himself into a spare crash seat and cinched the straps, but his eyes never left Arlen and Nyrix. Outside, Argent Spire's point defense batteries finished charging, their thick barrels whining as they lined up on the Rustwing's hull. In the command room, Soren folded his arms and watched the countdown on the holo. 3 seconds until the first volley slammed into the Rustwing and everything inside it, Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared included. In the Rustwing's cockpit, Kira slammed her fist into the console, firing up the auxiliary drives, growling, "Rustwing, if you don't fly this time, Kira and everyone are dead." At that moment, Nyrix suddenly lifted his head, placing his small hand on the deck as light ran from his skin along the welds, like roots digging into the Rustwing. Arlen felt the deck's vibrations change under her palms, syncing with Nyrix's heartbeat, until she shivered as if touching a living creature. The Rustwing's navigation system jittered wildly, then abruptly stabilized, painting a narrow escape path through the grid of fire Argent Spire's guns were about to unleash. Kira glanced at the nav plot, then checked an internal camera feed showing Nyrix touching the deck beside Arlen, instantly grasping who had just saved the Rustwing. "Nyrix, hold this crate together," Kira snarled, pulling the throttle. "Rustwing is jumping off Argent Spire right now." The Rustwing lurched, docking clamps snapping as shards of metal flew, while the ship tore itself free from the station. At the same instant, Argent Spire's point defense guns fired, lancing green energy beams across the Rustwing's accelerating trajectory. Guided by Nyrix's path, the Rustwing slipped through the gap between 2 volleys, but one beam still grazed her flank, scorching a whole strip of armor. The impact slammed Arlen's back into the bulkhead, making her clamp down harder on Nyrix, while Jared was pitched from his seat and dragged by his harness across the floor. In that moment of imbalance, a biocontrol squad mag-clamped to the Rustwing's hull, hooking themselves onto the ship like iron leeches. Helia confirms the strike team is secured to the Rustwing. The synthetic voice sounded in Soren's ear, preparing to breach and capture Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared. On the hull, one trooper planted a circular cutter on the Rustwing's thin plating, blue sparks spraying as it spun, aimed at the cargo bay where Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared sheltered. Inside, the metal scream from above made Arlen flinch, the glowing lines on her skin rising like goosebumps. Jared scrambled up, grabbed the plasma pistol, and gritted his teeth. Biocontrols on the hull. If we don't stop them now, they'll come straight for Arlen and Nyrix. Kira snapped on internal comms. Jared, get to the upper bay. Kira will keep Rustwing alive. Arlen, Nyrix, stay put. If we die together on this ship. Jared charged up the narrow stairs, each footfall echoing with the sound of metal being cut above, like two metronomes ticking toward violence. Arlen rose with Nyrix in her arms, and instead of retreating deeper into the ship, she followed after Jared, her heart refusing to leave him alone on the deck. In the upper cargo deck, a chunk of ceiling slammed down, and 3 biocontrol troopers dropped with smoke and sparks right in front of Jared. "Stand down, Jared," the biocontrol leader shouted through his mask. "Orders are to take Nyrix. Arlen and Jared get dropped if they resist." Jared lowered his gun, not to surrender, but to aim with more care, his tired brown eyes colder than Arlen had ever seen. "Nyrix isn't Soren's asset anymore," Jared said quietly, tightening his finger on the trigger. "And Arlen's not just a container for convergence." Jared's first plasma shot didn't kill anyone, but it burned out the commander's helmet sensors, blinding him briefly and knocking him back. The other 2 troopers fired back instantly, green blasts slicing across the bay and ripping open a crate right beside where Arlen was stepping in with Nyrix. Arlen spun, shielding Nyrix with her back as shards of composite wood pelted her blue skin, swallowing any cry of pain. Nyrix trembled, yet his hand once more found the deck, sending a short light pulse that made the Rustwing's gravity system glitch. For a heartbeat, everyone on the deck, Arlen, Nyrix, Jared, and the biocontrol troopers, tilted as their feet lost purchase on the floor. Jared, used to convergence test rigs, used the weightless moment to kick the gun from one trooper's hand and shoot down the other. The disarmed trooper hit the bulkhead, and as he looked up, Arlen slammed into him, bringing the metal shard down on his helmet and knocking him out. The Rustwing's gravity coughed and came back, dropping everyone to the floor in a heap, leaving groans and the stench of burnt ozone on the deck. Jared rolled the commander over and tore off his helmet, revealing a face he once knew by name but no longer wished to speak, seeing only Soren and Helia standing behind it. Arlen knelt beside Jared, one arm still around Nyrix, the other checking the trooper's pulse before letting go, eyes cold. "Enough. They'll send more as long as Nyrix is near Argent Spire." In the cockpit, Kira strapped in and lifted the nose, forcing the Rustwing out of Argent Spire's gravity well to prep for FTL even as the ship's core growled in protest. "Helia predicts Rustwing will enter jump zone in 2 minutes, the AI informed Soren. "It must be destroyed before Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared exit engagement range." Soren stared at the Rustwing's icon on the holo, mind flashing, through losing Nyrix and the convergence data, but also at the image of a child being shredded in the FTL horizon. Soren's lip twitched, then he gave the order. "Change priority. Do not hit the Rustwing's core. Disable only. Nyrix must live for convergence to continue." On the Rustwing, Kira hit internal comms, her voice hoarse but firm. "Jared, Arlen, Nyrix, prep for FTL jump, if Rustwing doesn't blow apart en route." Arlen lay on her side on the deck, cradling Nyrix tight, faceted eyes fixed unblinking on the trembling ceiling as she waited for space to tear. Jared slid down the wall to sit beside Arlen, one hand on her shoulder and the other on his gun, ready in case any more biocontrol troopers dared to breach the Rustwing. Nyrix looked from Jared to Kira on the internal screen, twin-ringed eyes seeming to understand that from now on, the 3 of them were bound by more than the trembling deck beneath them. A deep pop sounded like a cosmic bubble bursting. Then everything stretched, the light outside the port shattering into thin, glassy strands as the Rustwing jumped to FTL. Argent Spire shrank to a tiny point of light, its guns falling silent, leaving Helia and Soren staring into the void where Nyrix's convergence had just slipped from their grasp. In the purple-green FTL tunnel, the Rustwing shuddered as if about to split in two, but the light from Nyrix's hand on the floor kept the vibrations from going beyond the limit. Arlen pressed her cheek to Nyrix's hair and closed her eyes, allowing herself, for the first time since that snowstorm on the frozen world, to believe that tomorrow they would still be alive. And maybe not just the two of them anymore. The Rustwing burst out of the FTL tunnel with a brutal jolt, sending Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared sliding across the deck as if flung from a nightmare. Through a small viewport, Arlen saw a pale yellow star and a strange blue-gray world, a shattered ring of ice glittering along its orbit. Emergency drop, Glacies 17 system. Kira's voice came over the speaker. No official stations here, just rock, ice, and people who don't want to be found, like Arlen and Nyrix. Nyrix closed his eyes, small hand still pressed to the deck, feeling new, unfamiliar gravity lines, gentler by far than the heavy shadow of Argent Spire. Jared leaned against the bulkhead, watching Nyrix like a door that had opened without revealing whether it led to light or an abyss. Nyrix's convergence isn't just an experiment, Jared murmured, almost only for Arlen. It's a language this whole universe is starting to speak. Arlen frowned, her faceted eyes catching countless reflections of Nyrix, Kira, and Jared in the metal around her, like a new family already pulled into the heart of a far larger storm. In Argent Spire's command room, Helia reconstructed the Rustwing's entire FTL path, space-time curves rising like thin cuts in the dark. Probability the Rustwing dropped into Glacies 17. 93%, Helia reported. A silent monitor packet has been seeded into the jump trace to await Nyrix's next contact with the lattice. Soren stood before the star chart, seeing dozens of other systems marked as convergence trials, realizing Nyrix was only one of many embers smoldering in the dark. If Nyrix escapes, Soren said quietly, the other convergences will hear it. This stops being a jailbreak and becomes a signal of revolt. Helia did not answer in words, merely brightened all the convergence points a little, as if smiling without a face. On the Rustwing, Kira eased the speed, drifting the ship into the shadow of an ice moon, whose surface was etched with cracks like a frozen spiderweb. We're wedging the Rustwing into a fissure, killing every signal, disappearing, Kira said, at least until Nyrix's body and mind stopped shaking at the sound of Soren's footsteps. Arlen sat in the cargo bay, watching Nyrix sleep in her lap, her faceted eyes lifting to the ceiling as if piercing through to the same star map Helia studied. If Nyrix is a door, Arlen told Jared, then Arlen doesn't want Nyrix opening for people like Soren. Arlen wants that door to belong to Nyrix himself. Jared nodded, voicing for the first time what he'd always feared. And if the other convergences are doors too, Nyrix has to be the first to learn to lock them, before someone uses them to crush a galaxy. Kira appeared in the hatchway, leaning on the frame, eyeing the three of them with exhausted eyes, but no distance left in her gaze. If Arlen, Nyrix, and Jared want a war with Soren and Helia, Kira said dryly, then the Rustwing can be the first fortress, even if it's just a shabby one. Arlen touched the ship's wall, the glowing lines on her skin blending with the dim lights, as if accepting a vow the Rustwing itself could never speak. Deep in the ship's core, Nyrix felt a faint feedback, as if the Rustwing were touching back, agreeing to be the shell for a war yet to begin. On Argent Spire, Helia opened a secure channel, projecting an image of Nyrix touching the deck into the Alliance data center, where vested officials argued over the words stability and control. Soren stood beyond the projection, listening to every cold phrase about turning convergences like Nyrix into biological defense lines for the galactic frontier. They think they'll use Nyrix to keep the borders quiet, Soren told Helia as he left. But if Arlen teaches Nyrix to say no, the borders and the core will both shake. Helia analyzed both scenarios, Nyrix submitting or rebelling, and in each, Convergence spread like roots. Only the question of who held the root remained. On the ice moon, the Rustwing slowly settled into a deep fissure, the ice cracking beneath her and then closing, swallowing the ship into shadow. Inside the darkness, Kira powered systems down one by one until only the soft glow from Nyrix's hand and the faint lines on Arlen's skin lit Jared's thoughtful face. "Tomorrow," Jared said, "Jared will teach Nyrix to read star charts, and Arlen and Kira will teach Nyrix the difference between a friend and someone who wants to turn Nyrix into a weapon." Arlen gave a small laugh, strange in her throat, like ice cracking in the first spring after a winter that had lasted too long. On the star map forming in Nyrix's mind, though he was still only a child, the other convergence points had begun to blink, as if waiting for Nyrix to answer. And in the darkness beneath the ice, between an old ship and a glowing child, the first seeds of a war between freedom and control quietly took root.